So I've been using the Sony FX3 probably longer than most people have, and the reason being is because Sony back in January of 2021 gave me early access to this camera so I can make a review on it. Now since then, I've actually bought 3 FX3s with my own money, and these cameras have been incredible. Now this video is not sponsored by Sony, but we do have a sponsor, and that is Artlist, but more on them a little bit later. So I think it's important to let you guys know what camera the FX3 replaced. So prior to owning the FX3, I was using a Canon C500 Mark II for just about everything, YouTube, production work, and I know a lot of people at the time were thinking, you are crazy to sell your C500 Mark II that can record in 6K internal RAW, has SDI ports, has built-in ND filters. I mean, it's a full-blown cinema camera for something like the FX3. But I think this is where the story changes because it's a true testament of how incredible this camera really is. One of the biggest things that attracted me to the FX3 from the get-go is its form factor. This thing is very tiny. Even in today's standard, in 2024, this is one of the smallest full-frame cameras that you can buy. On top of that, there's different 1/4-20 mounting options throughout the camera, which means you don't necessarily need a cage, and that's one of the things I like about it because I'm often doing car stuff and I'm rigging this up inside the car, outside the car, so a lot of times I don't want to use cages because that adds more weight. So having these 1/4-20 mounts allows me to get very creative. Also, I can mount different types of accessories, get creative with shots, things that I normally couldn't do with other cameras or that would require additional rigging options. So the form factor, the small size, and just being very compact is what was really attractive in comparison, again, to the C500 Mark II, which was significantly heavier and also much larger. Now, something else that impressed me on the FX3 is the image quality. The image quality on the FX3 is freaking goated. Now, I've used the Sony A7S III, I've used the Sony FX6, and they all pretty much share the same sensor technology. But once again, having it in a smaller form factor and a more cinema-style body was something that really intrigued me with this camera. Now, since the launch of the Sony FX3, there's been a plethora of new cameras. Now, being in the position that I am as a content creator, I get early access to just about any new camera that gets released. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, pretty much any camera from 2021 and on is pretty much an amazing camera. And if you can't work that camera, it's your fault. But with that being said, I still gravitate and I come back to the Sony FX3. Why? The biggest reason is kind of what I said earlier, the form factor, the size, the image quality, the fact that I can rig this just about anywhere. This is something that I really can't do with other cameras. Now, the other thing is the workflow, the ease of use. This camera is just so freaking easy to use. Like, the autofocus is amazing. Even in today's standards in 2024, the only thing that's competing with this camera is Sony's own lineup. Like, even stuff from other manufacturers still can't hold up to the Sony's autofocus system. Its internal body image stabilization on this camera is still one of the best out there. Still in 2024, this camera is 3 years old. So this is why I keep coming back to this camera. In fact, I just directed a commercial where we were using the Komodo X. So a lot of times when I'm doing bigger productions, I'm gonna be using red. But I still bring the FX3, and funny enough, we had a shot where we had to put the camera inside a fridge. Now, we could have used the Komodo X, it was fine. We would have had to pull focus, but this camera makes it so much easier. And it's funny, every time I'm doing like a bigger project, I often talk to the director or DP and I say something like, you know, if we would have shot this with the FX3, we would have been done by now. That's what I love about this camera, is its workflow, its ease of use, the color grading, everything about it. Now, speaking of workflow, something that has drastically also changed my workflow is Artlist. They have an incredible music library. So everything that you've been listening now has been from Artlist. But one of the things I really like is their new AI function tool. Now, this voiceover tool from Artlist is so impressive that I actually want to demo it for you so you guys can see how it works. Now, if you go to the Artlist website, they have a new tab called voiceover, and here you're able to choose from a variety of male and female voices that you can select to try out. Now, one thing you'll notice is how real it sounds like, and that's because they're using real actors, so it sounds lifelike and not so robotic. Now, once you find a voiceover that matches the style that you're looking for, you can enter the text you want to convert, hit generate, and within a few seconds, it will create a voiceover for you.
Hey, I'm Lucas, and I'm an FPV drone pilot. Why do I love what I do so much?
Now here's a part that I think is wild, is the fact that in the voice settings, there's 3 different sliders where you can change like the tonality and inflection to really fine tune the voiceover, which I think is freaking amazing. But aside from their useful voiceover tool, I personally love their music library. I tend to search for cinematic style music and I find their music library much more complete. If you guys are looking to sign up for a year, if you use my link down below in the description, you will get 2 months for free. So again, make sure to use my link down below in the description. Huge shout out to Artlist for sponsoring this video. Now let's go back talking about the Sony FX3. Another reason why I keep gravitating towards this camera is the fact that there's an ecosystem of accessories. There's a lot of third-party companies building accessories for this camera. For example, literally, I just got this in the mail like 2 days ago. Shout out to Chris Brockhurst because I saw this on his Instagram video. This is a NATO rail that allows you to keep your hot shoe. So if I want to mount something like, let's say this Talon top handle from Condor Blue, I'm able to do that. Now, mind you, I don't have a cage on this camera, but look at this. Now I have a top handle where I can also mount a monitor and a little small accessory. So the ecosystem of accessories is something that's very important. When we shot that commercial, the one where we used the red Komodo X, I actually had to use an underwater rig to get these underwater shots. Guess what? I went onto Amazon, I typed in FX3 underwater, and lo and behold, there was an underwater housing that I can actually buy for the Sony FX3. So that's the thing, like this camera has so many accessories. So sure, you can buy a new camera, the latest and greatest, or even a camera that's 1 or 2 years old. But if there's no third-party support, that's where it becomes a problem, because I can rig this camera up very minimal like the way you see it here, or I can build this up to the ultimate cinema camera. But it's not just third-party accessories that make the FX3 so great, it's also lens support. Now this is more of a Sony thing rather than an FX3 thing, but I figured because the FX3 is part of a Sony camera, I would talk about it because I think that's really important. This is a Canon 16-35mm lens. Now this is a Sigma MC11 adapter that costs about $200. With this adapter, I'm able to get true autofocus using virtually any Canon lens, so long as the Canon lens supports autofocus. Now, this is something that you really can't do with many cameras out there, but more importantly, Sony has an incredible amount of lenses, not only from the Sony side, like their own lineup, which I think G Master lenses are amongst the best out there, but you're also able to adapt. For example, on Canon, there's really no third-party support. Like for example, on Sony, you have Sigma making lenses, you have Rokinon making E-mount lenses, you have Tamron making lenses for Sony cameras. You'll never see that because RF from Canon is a closed system. So when it comes to lens selections, I gotta say, if you're using a Sony camera, you're gonna have access to way more lenses than pretty much any other camera manufacturer. So in the last 3 years, I've been using the Sony FX3 pretty much for all of my YouTube content. So I would say a good portion, like 90 to 95% of the videos uploaded in the last 3 years, most likely I use the Sony FX3 unless I stated otherwise. For paid commercial work, projects, short films, music videos, I've used the Sony FX3. Even on bigger projects where I'm using like a RED camera, I still bring the Sony FX3 as a B camera and we end up using it. So this camera has been used in tons of work. I put it through hell and back. I've literally put this in extreme weather conditions, not only on the cold side, but also in the heat, 120 degree plus. Like I said, we put this in an underwater housing for several hours where there's no ventilation. It's just enclosed. Never once did it overheat. This thing has just been reliable. It's been a workhorse. Like the Sony FX3 is just a beast of a camera. And honestly, people ask me like, what do you plan to upgrade or what's your next camera system? I couldn't care less. To me, I want to focus more on cinematography, getting better at my craft. This camera, even today, is just a beast. It has so many options. Like, I know the FX30 exists and there's gonna be people out there that are gonna say, well, what about the FX30? FX30 is a great camera. I'm more of a snob. Again, I'm just speaking for myself. I can see the difference in image quality. Like, to me, the image quality on the FX3 is significantly better than the FX30. I also like to shoot sometimes at higher ISOs, 12,800. So again, I'd rather just pony up and get the FX3. Again, I'm just speaking for myself. I understand that the FX30 is a great value, and it's also the same form factor, but to me the FX3 is just a better camera system. In fact, I'm filming this with the FX3, and obviously I'm showing you guys the Sony FX3. So the only camera system, or the only camera that I think that could potentially bump this, is the Sony FX3 Mark II, whenever that comes out. And that's only if they keep it in a similar form factor. We still have those quarter 20 mounts. I can care less about built-in ND filters. SDI port would be nice, hopefully 6K. But yeah, built-in NDs, don't really care about that. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this long-term FX3 review. If you're on the fence, if you're thinking about buying this camera, this is one of the best cameras that I've ever used. And honestly, even in 2024, it's definitely worth buying. My name is Armando. Thanks again for watching, and you will catch me in the next one. Adios.